Sean Diddy Combs has been denied bail after the verdict in his sex trafficking case, and here's how he took the news. According to NBC News reporters in the courtroom, Combs appeared, quote, deflated as his hopes of going home were seemingly dashed as his lawyers attempted to convince Judge Aaron Subramanian to release their client ahead of his sentencing. In his ruling, Subramanian cited Combs' years-long pattern of violence as a reason for him to remain behind bars.
It was meant to be an ordinary court date, nothing out of the usual. Just to check in after a verdict that had already made headlines everywhere. But the moment Diddy walked back into that courtroom, everything changed. You could feel the tension in the room, heavy and silent as everyone held their breath.
Today's a great victory. It's a great victory for Sean Combs. It's a great victory for the jury system. You saw that the Southern District of New York prosecutors came at him with all that they had. They're not stopping, but one thing stands between all of us and a prison, and that is a jury of 12 citizens. And we had a wonderful jury. They listened to every word, and they got the situation right, or certainly right enough. They acquitted him of the sex trafficking, which he was absolutely innocent of. They acquitted him of the racketeering conspiracy that he was absolutely innocent of, and all of the components to it. The kidnapping, he was innocent of that. The arson, he was innocent of that. The obstructing justice, he was innocent of that. And that is no longer just me saying that. That is the verdict of our jury. So today's a great day. Today is a win. Today is a victory of all victories for Sean Combs and our legal team. And I want to say one thing. There are very few people around whom a legal team could coalesce and become one.
The court was not convinced. Now, by law, the defense has the burden to prove that Combs is not a flight risk or danger to the community. And given the charges, the allegations, including that he was improperly trying to contact people in the case pre-trial, he was always denied release. But then there's what happened after the verdict last week. And this is an interesting conversation. And again, we're going to be speaking with Ira Judelson in a minute, who's been working with Diddy's team on possibly getting him released. But after the verdict, the defense applied for Combs to be released from detention pending sentencing. But that request was again denied by Judge Aaron Subramanian. The defense argued, look, he's no longer charged with RICO. There's no longer presumption of detention. We have his passport. There's no access to private planes. There's no criminal history. This is his first conviction. He would be a fool to mess any of this up because he was just given his life back by the jury. He wasn't convicted of the highest charges. He was facing up to life in prison. Now he's not. He should be allowed to return to his property, his mansion in Florida. There'll be a $1 million bond. Now, the government argued, look, Sean Combs, he was convicted of serious charges, Mann Act violations. There was physical abuse in this case. There was prolific use and distribution of drugs. He committed crimes while under investigation, including having drugs in his hotel room when he planned to surrender to federal authorities back in September of 2024. And Judge Aaron Subramanian denied the bail application, sided with the government, that these convictions on these charges, by law, they trigger the mandatory detention statute, that the defense conceded Combs is violent. They conceded that
As the judge walked in, the room fell so quiet you could hear the clock ticking. This hearing wasn't just about bail anymore, it was about power. And what happens when a music giant finally faces the consequences he thought would never touch him? Diddy sat there trying to keep his composure. But his eyes told another story. Red, puffy, exhausted, his usual confidence was gone. His lawyers looked just as worn out, flipping through papers not because they had something new, but just to look occupied. They had tried everything, using connections, bringing in statements, raising new points, even mentioning mental health. But the judge had heard it all before. Then, the moment arrived. The judge spoke clearly. The court has reviewed your bail request again. The evidence is still strong, the verdict remains. And the reasons for denying bail the first time haven't changed. In fact, things have only gotten worse, Mr. Combs. Your request for bail is denied once more.
The bail hearing, right after the verdict, it was a question of should Sean Combs be granted release while awaiting sentencing, which the judge set today, by the way. Sort of set the sentencing date. I'll talk more about that as well. But I mean, let's talk about Sean Combs. He's been locked up since September 2024. He's been denied bail at each turn. There was a change of circumstances here. He had just been acquitted of 3 of the charges. So could he make bail? We're going to talk about it. All right, so to discuss the hearing and more, let me bring on, once again, hopefully not for the last time, but we're at basically the end of this case until sentencing, joined once again by Law and Crime's in-court reporter, Elizabeth Milner. Great to see you. First of all, your reaction to the verdict. Is this what you expected? Because let's really briefly explain what happened yesterday. That, we thought it kind of gave us a preview into what would happen today. Not necessarily so.
Yeah, I was not going to lie, Jesse, a little surprised by the verdict in that I really kind of thought there was a really strong case for count 2, that obviously being sex trafficking as it relates to Cassie Ventura. And that was only because of the questions that the jury was asking when they were bringing some notes back. And that was kind of in relation to what had happened at specific instances that the government point out were allegations of sex trafficking. So I thought because of the tone that was inside the courtroom, the way the family was getting a little bit emotional sitting inside the gallery, even Diddy's demeanor, for the most part, we've seen him kind of really keep up his spirits. But yesterday was really a time where we kind of saw, I think, the weight weighing in on him, that it's possible a conviction on some of the more serious charges were going to happen. And so when the jury came back not guilty on count 1, 2, and 4, I was a little surprised, especially to count 2, but, I do respect the jury's decision. They spent a lot of time listening to this case, listening to all the testimony, listening to all the evidence, and that was the verdict that they had rendered.
Yep. I wasn't surprised that they found him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. We have been saying since for weeks on this show that felt like a straightforward path to conviction. Wasn't surprised not guilty with Jane, given some of the gray areas of her testimony, but also the jury didn't even ask for one readback of her testimony or anything to do with her testimony, so it made me think they might have already been decided there. I was surprised about Cassie Ventura sex trafficking just because, like you said, the readback of that testimony, and then shortly thereafter, they came back yesterday and said, we have a verdict on that charge. So I thought, they're convinced. And when it came to racketeering, I thought they were still going to be hung because they said they were at an impasse yesterday. It seemed like based on their note, there was no way that would change. The judge told them to continue deliberating. They come back today, and like in an hour, they come back not guilty on racketeering. I'm not really sure what that split ultimately will be. Maybe the jurors will speak out and we'll hear. Got to ask you about Diddy's reaction. Okay, so we have courtroom sketches of what it looked like. You were in there. What was his reaction to the verdict?
Oh, he was very pleased with the verdict. Obviously, I think for the defense and the defendant, that being...
As the judge walked in, the room fell so quiet you could hear the clock ticking. This hearing wasn't just about bail anymore, it was about power. And what happens when a music giant finally faces the consequences he thought would never touch him? Diddy sat there trying to keep his composure. But his eyes told another story. Red, puffy, exhausted, his usual confidence was gone. His lawyers looked just as worn out, flipping through papers not because they had something new, but just to look occupied. They had tried everything, using connections, bringing in statements, raising new points, even mentioning mental health. But the judge had heard it all before. Then, the moment arrived. The judge spoke clearly. The court has reviewed your bail request again. The evidence is still strong, the verdict remains. And the reasons for denying bail the first time haven't changed. In fact, things have only gotten worse, Mr. Combs. Your request for bail is denied once more.
Sean Combs, I think obviously they would have wanted an acquittal on all the charges, but I think given that they weren't a conviction on the more serious charges of RICO conspiracy and sex trafficking as it relates to Cassie in one charge and Jane in another charge, I think overall Combs was very, very pleased with the jury, to the point where I saw him kind of mouth a little thank you to the jurors as they were still sitting kind of in the jury box, as they were kind of leaving for the end of their day. Obviously, we still have some more matters to address for our end, but in terms of just his reaction, even his family's reaction, Jesse, I think they were so happy knowing that there's such a strong possibility that their father will come home. Obviously, if he would have been convicted on the more serious charges, that might have been a different discussion. But given that he was only convicted on count 3 and 5, that being the Mann Act, it seems like given that it comes with a lesser penalty and sentencing, I think the family is like, yes, our father is coming home, our loved one is coming home, and we hope to see him very, very soon.
And talk about a reaction. Outside that courthouse, my gosh, what has been going on out there? There's verbal disputes, people spraying things. What is, just give us a brief summary of what you've witnessed outside that courthouse after the verdict.
I've witnessed a lot, Jesse. A lot was going on. There was kind of, I will even say, pandemonium after the verdict was read. And outside, a lot of Diddy supporters, a lot of people who are kind of with the Free Diddy, I wouldn't say movement, but I guess, they believed in his innocence. They were very pleased, even thinking that it was a possibility he'd just walk outside of that courthouse at some point. But it was a lot of commotion. I did see some people getting to some heated debates, especially in relation to Cassie. I saw some people getting very upset because they believed that the government was trying to take a good man down who did a lot for the culture. Those types of conversations were being had from a lot of people in the public. I even saw some kind of weirder things, and that being people squirting baby oil on themselves. And one of the reporters even got some on her shirt by one of the people who were kind of over in that area. And so a lot was going on, to the point that I think the courthouse police were just kind of like, okay, we need everybody to calm down. They have barricades going all the way down the street. I think in the event that Sean Combs would have walked out of that courthouse, it would have just been straight chaos, I think, outside. But for the most part, especially with that not happening around that time frame, that a lot of people, especially his supporters, were very pleased. And obviously for some, they were a little disappointed with the verdict. But for most that we could see here at the courthouse, a lot seemed pleased by today's decision.
So, Elizabeth, let's talk about what happened next, because right after the verdict, it goes into the idea of, can he be released on bail? Okay, and the judge set a hearing for 5 p.m. So later on today, you literally, at the time of this recording, just got out of there. Remember, from a legal point of view, the burden is on the defense to show that Sean Combs is not a danger or won't flee. What was the judge's decision, and why did the judge decide that?
Well, given that the top of our show, Jesse, or the top of your show, because it's a sidebar presented by Law and Crime with the host of Jesse Weber, but given at the top of the show that we didn't announce that Sean Combs walked out of this courthouse, I think it was kind of a little bit of a spoiler for the viewers here that the judge decided to keep him behind bars until his sentencing hearing. So I did see kind of a little bit of disappointment from both Sean Combs and his family after the judge made his decision. So the judge said that the jury convicted the defendant on count 3 and 5. That being the Mann Act. He says,
"It was quiet, it was calm, but it was final." The judge took off his glasses, stacked his papers neatly, and moved on to the next case. This moment wasn't just about Diddy. It was the system's way of reminding everyone that, no matter how high you climb, the fall is always close. No bail, no sympathy. Just the steady ticking of the clock, counting down the days until the final sentence. And in that moment, Diddy knew this wasn't just another legal setback. It was the end of the illusion he had lived in for so long. As he was led through the back hallways of the courthouse, away from flashing cameras and shouting crowds, a different kind of silence followed him. It wasn't the silence of fear or power. It was the silence of a man watching his empire collapse from within. The guards walking beside him didn't say a word. They didn't need to. Every step reminded him that the rules no longer bent in his favor. The velvet ropes, the private entrances gone. The paparazzi who once followed him everywhere gone. Now, the only lights were the buzzing, flickering fluorescence above him as he walked toward the holding cell. Inside, he sat quietly, on the edge of a steel bench, alone with the truth.
Is the DA's hearing about a bail, putting it together, which could take days, weeks, as in this case that we're talking about right now, Puffy. I started on this case going back almost 7 months ago when they brought me in as a consultant, because federal bail and state bail are two different things. State bail was most of the bails that I write. Federal bail, they don't need a bondsman. They do go through pretrial services. But a lot of times major attorneys will bring me in to consult because they'll be denied, and they'll say, hey, what do we do? So in this case with Puffy, I got brought in, and we talked about possibly renting out his plane and keeping it in Honolulu. We talked about surrendering his passport, his family's passports. We talked about putting up his house. We talked about private security 24/7. We talked about a call log seat to see who's going to call him, also who's going to come see him, who's going to come in, who's going to come out, letting the government see what they have. So if anybody walks in to see him, they know exactly who's coming to see him. So a bondsman basically puts it together. In a lot of words, I'm a legal loan shark. I lend money to people that are in trouble to get them out of jail.
There was a very unique bail package. And you didn't tell me if it was unique. $50 million, right?
Yes.
You know, the idea of private security. It was an interesting argument because who would monitor him. It was interesting because the prosecution at one point had said it's not fair, right? He's a wealthy celebrity who's providing a bail package that other people in his similar position wouldn't be able to provide. Now, the defense was like, well, the only reason we're presenting a package like this is because of what he's accused of and his wealth and his resources. We have to address that in a certain way. The reason it's so extensive is because of his wealth and resources. That bail package that was put forward was rejected by the court. What did you make of that?
Well, at that time, the judge was looking at the RICO Act and sex trafficking. So, Puffy was looking at possibly 25 years, or more, depending on what the guidelines were based on if he was convicted. So at 55 years old, at that time, it's almost a life sentence. So, and he has a lot of wealth and he had a private plane. So the judge was looking at that. Plus, in the federal system, they look at danger to the community. Where in the state system, they're not allowed to look at that. They look at risk of flight. So I think with all the letters behind that were coming in that we were not really privy to from a lot of the alleged victims, I think the judge made a decision that, hey, this is not going to be sufficient enough. I thought that at the end, he kind of, when we brought it on our private security team and we showed him who was going to be doing it, we did Sam Bankman-Fried. So we knew that, we would be completely covered on that end. And we gave him the idea of there would be no Wi-Fi in the building that we were looking at, and that he would not be able to really be able to connect with anybody but his legal team and his family. We thought at that point that maybe we had a chance, but at the end, the judge denied it, and that's where we stood. And now on this case coming forward, after the convictions, after he wasn't convicted, at the end, we didn't know what he was going to do. So, when Mark reached out to me afterwards, we started thinking about putting another bail package together.
And what is that bail package and by the way, is this a bail package that you think could be submitted again even after the judge just denied bail?
Well, the judge denied bail based on the statute, and the statute stated a certain amount of information that part of the Mann Act that, was not eligible for bail.
The courtroom wasn't moved by drama, it was moved by truth, and that truth couldn't be ignored. The media couldn't get enough. Every channel had panels picking apart each detail of the case. Former insiders leaked more stories, photos came out, voice messages, text messages, piece by piece, everything came to light. And while the chaos unfolded, the judge remained steady. The next morning brought another hearing. Just a routine step. Diddy wasn't brought in this time. The court had already made its choice. Bail was denied again. The prosecution filed new motions while the defense pushed back week after week. Pressure was building toward the final sentence. But the damage was already done. Record label partners backed away. Artists who once worked with him quietly deleted old posts. The alliances Diddy thought were built on loyalty disappeared one by one. They hadn't been about loyalty, they were about opportunity. And when standing by him became a risk, they were gone. A court stenographer later told reporters that she had never seen anything like it, not because of the evidence, but because of the silence that filled the room after the ruling. It was as if everyone took a breath and never let it out. When Diddy's family finally visited, they hardly recognized him. He looked thinner, pale, a shadow of the man who once filled arenas. He broke down, crying, begging for another chance. Any way out, any miracle, but there was nothing left. Jail therapists saw the change in him. Some days, he refused to eat. He would sit for hours, staring at the walls. The only sound in his mind, the echo of the verdict, denied, again and again. Each hearing felt like another nail in the coffin, each denial another wound. And as the world moved on to the next headline, his name stayed tied to one word: downfall. Still, the final sentencing day was coming, a date marked on the calendar. The day he would find out exactly how many years he would lose. How many birthdays spent behind bars? How many holidays in silence? How many nights wondering how everything fell apart, deep down? Even he knew it wasn't stolen from him. It was given away, piece by piece, decision by decision, lie by lie. And when the gavel finally fell and the court rose for the last time, there would be no shock, only silence. And the sound of the door closing behind him, one last time. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to stay tuned. Because with this story, sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.